Welcome back, Richard. It's good to see you this morning.
Good morning. Another, we do this all the time, and I hope it doesn't bother anybody else. But we do these dates, and I'm thinking it's already the end of August.
Yes.
The time is just flying. I guess the start of school and end of summer, start of school,
Yeah.
it just flying by. So,
Yeah. Well,
how are you this morning?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing well, and I think that today's topic is like very timely, at least for us
Right.
personally, because you know, just a little story for listeners. You know, here in our office, we see patients every day, and we have our office is in this nice little area where there's a little wooded area around and everything. And yesterday afternoon, you know, good old Dr. Marshall saved everyone. I'm in my office in session with a patient, and I walk out and somebody says, did Dr. Marshall tell you about the snake? I said, no, I haven't heard anything about a snake. And a patient is standing out there and says, oh, by the way, there's a snake in the bathroom. It's like, oh, okay. And so, Dr. Marshall, you saved the day by going in and catching this snake and
Snake.
putting it back in the woods where he belongs.
Yeah, that's right. Put him out in bushes where he's happy in his new home.
That's
So,
right. But it's a timely, so that makes today's topic of anxiety very timely, because snakes are something that brings a lot of people a lot of anxiety. But there's a
right.
lot of things that bring us anxiety. So we're gonna talk actually over the next couple of podcasts a little bit about anxiety, and we're gonna start today about the fact that anxiety is necessary. We need anxiety. It's a natural part of human evolution.
Right. Yeah, that we discovered this little blurb. It was published part of a book by Wendy Suzuki called "Good Anxiety," which is an attention grabber. How is anxiety good? Wendy Suzuki is a professor of neuroscience and psychology at New York University. Well-educated, published researcher. And what I really like about this is that she makes a very complicated topic very, very simple. She distills it into two issues. Her main thesis is that we tend to see anxiety as a bad thing.
Right.
We all say, oh, it's a bad thing. It is a mental illness, in fact. It is the most common mental illness.
Right.
That there's almost 20%, about 19.1 or almost 20% of those of us in the U.S. experience anxiety. And what she's saying is, yes, it is all those things, but it is also a normal human emotion. And that's what she stresses in this article and in her book,
Yeah.
is that she wants us to change the way we think about anxiety. And I think she's absolutely right.
Yeah.
We've talked about this many, many times, that rather than treating anxiety as an illness that we should get rid of, what she urges us to do is to consider the neuroscience of anxiety and the psychological interventions that we can use to better manage, to take advantage of anxiety and to use it as our bodies intended it to be used, how it has evolved over time.
Yeah. And I think that this is a really good article. It's a really good book also, because what it does is it uses anxiety in the way I think that most people use anxiety. In the past, we've talked about, we've differentiated worry and stress and anxiety, and we've kind of differentiated those. But the reality is that most people just use the word anxiety. And so
Right.
I think the way that she's talking about it here is much like we've talked about it in the past, that anxiety is it's telling us something. She defines anxiety as the feeling of fear or worry typically associated with situations of uncertainty.
And that's the main, that uncertainty.
That's the
Right.
important part, right? And so what happens is when we're not sure about what's going to happen, our anxiety, using that word, our anxiety elevates. And
Mhm.
then, our mind starts to go into places where we start to think about all kinds of bad things that could happen and negative things that could come out as a result.
That's
And
right.
it causes us a lot of distress.
Right. And what I love about her approach is she says, no, what, slow down. Let's rethink anxiety, because what happens is that there are two parts of the brain that are relevant to this discussion of anxiety. One is the subcortical, the under the cortex structures in the limbic system. And one of those in particular is called the amygdala.
Right.
And amygdala means almond, and it's kind of under, there's one structure under, sort of under each of your eyes. And it's activated when you hear or see something new. Um, and it does this because something new could be dangerous. And so people who didn't react to something new often were killed and those genes died. But people who did react kept that mechanism active in our brain. And so these two little brain structures are designed to react, to respond to something that is new. Once those are activated, then you have to say, well, should I worry about this? Do I need to worry about this new thing? Is it something that might be dangerous? And when that happens, we recruit the top part of our brain, especially the frontal lobe of the front of the top of our brain, the cortex, and we recruit that, and then we make a decision about, yes, this is something I should avoid, and let me do something, or no, I don't need to worry about this. That decision making, that cognitive, intellectual, mental function of making a decision is done by the frontal lobe of the cortex. So you have two brain parts, the frontal lobe and these underlying emotion generating structures that are in the middle of our brain underneath the cortex. Those
Right.
two things are always working together. Okay.
Right. And they need to work together so
Right.
that, as you said, it keeps us safe, but then
Mhm.
also helps us learn.
Right.
The and it's very funny, again, thinking about the situation that happened here in our office yesterday, because that is an example that we often use, where
Mhm.
you're working in your backyard, and um you move something that's been on the ground for a few days, and you jump back because you think that there's a snake, and then you realize
Something's something's moving. All
something's
of a sudden the
there.
ground is moving, right?
Right.
That
And then
certainty.
your brain, the information finally gets to your prefrontal cortex, and you say, that was just the water hose.
Right.
And so you lift it back up, and sure enough, there's the water hose coil there, not a snake or anything dangerous. But that the amygdala keeps us safe, and then the prefrontal cortex helps us learn so that we can then make better decisions the next time.
A real good example, we have a lot of black racers. They're called black racers. It's a black snake. They can get up to four, I guess, 3 or 4 or 5 feet long. If you pick up the rock and suddenly everything's moving, your amygdala immediately fires. That's something unexpected, uncertainty. So you react, and then you say, "Oh, that's a black racer. I don't need to worry about that." That's the cortex working.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so there you see that perfect example of you react, and you say, "That's your limbic system. That's your amygdala," and
Right.
then you say, "Oh, that's a black racer. I don't need to worry about that. It's not going
Right.
to harm."
Now,
Yeah,
if you've had a really bad experience with a snake, or if you have maybe like a phobia or something like that, even when that information gets to your cortex is like, but that's still dangerous, get away. and
right.
and then you still work to get away, and so you don't go in and use a
Yeah.
paper towel, as someone did yesterday, to get him out.
Right. Um,
But
so so we
you
have
try to get away as fast as you can, because your experience tells you that I need to get away from this because this thing is dangerous for whatever
Yeah,
reason.
when I saw that snake yesterday, it was small enough, and I thought, well, it really doesn't pose a danger. It's not a threat. So that's my cortex talking to me and making sense of this situation. Had that been a cobra, had it been a 5 or 6 foot cobra, I probably would have exited the building very quickly and called for animal control.
Probably.
What happens is, what Dr. Suzuki tells us is there's two problems here. One is that in the face of uncertainty, the emotional structures of our brain are aroused. Okay, that they immediately jump to the conclusion something's wrong. You got to do something about it. At the same time that that happens, the thinking part of the brain shuts down.
Right.
So that's the anomaly here, is that your your um, your emotional structures get elevated and your thinking structures sort of shut down. They sort of get out of the way. I don't let me bother you. You do whatever you have to do to save your life. Okay.
Right. And it makes sense how that happens because, if you have to get away to save your life, what do you
Mhm.
need? You need fuel to your muscles to get away. And so blood immediately goes to all of your extremities so that you can be
Right.
fast and strong and you can fight or flight or whatever you need to do to get away. Um, the thing that's going to be sacrificed for that blood and fuel is your cortex. You don't need to think, you don't need to be doing algebra when you're running from a bear. So
Yeah.
the blood
If
kind of shunts away from your cortex and it goes to your extremities so that you can be faster and stronger to get to safety.
Yeah, I don't want you to spend, your brain is saying, I don't want you to spend too much time in a dangerous situation trying to figure out what to do. Let me get you out of here first,
Right.
and then we'll
Right.
decide what to do. Okay,
Right.
so problem number one is you activate emotional structures and your brain shuts down thinking structures. Problem number two is we have been blessed with a something called negativity bias.
Right.
When we are stressed, or tired or anxious, we tend to see things in a more negative light. And the
Mhm.
reason that happens is if I'm not sure, let me err on the side of caution. If I'm not sure what I'm dealing with, I'm going to assume the worst.
Mhm.
I'll run first and then ask questions later. I'll get out of the way, and then I can figure out what I'm dealing with. But
Right.
we all have this negativity bias, and you can see where that can lead you, if
Mhm.
you're thinking negative all the time. But that's supposed to happen.
Right.
This is not a bad thing. I mean, the fact that you're doing this is a very adaptive, it's a life-saving mechanism in our brain. So we have two problems. One is we get emotions and less thinking, and the second one is it's a negativity bias. We're going to assume the worst. Now,
Absolutely.
given that, then let's move on to what do we do about this? What should we do about this very useful function called this very useful thing called anxiety?
Right. And we're posting or including the link to a paper or article by Carolyn Spring, who talks about some steps for managing anxiety. And one of the things I like about some of these steps is, again, sort of like Suzuki says, she's kind of normalizing some of it. That,
Right.
look, anxiety is an important communication from your neurological system that
Right.
you should pay attention to, that you should listen to, and don't ignore it. But
Mhm.
instead of freaking out about it, let's do something positive about it. So what her advice is pretty comprehensive and it helps. While these aren't necessarily quick fixes, they do help reduce anxiety and they will help you help you use anxiety in the way in which it was meant to be used based upon our sort of evolutionary system.
Right, because most of the articles on managing anxiety, you start reading them and they say, here's 5 things you can do, or here's 10 strategies you can use. Deep
And
breathing.
and they're all for getting rid of anxiety.
That's right. All of them are meant to rid you of this uncomfortable feeling. And what these two articles are saying is, wait a minute, that may not be such a good idea. Anxiety, we have an anxiety response for a very good reason. And what we have to learn how to do is listen to that. In fact, this seems odd, but I would say to you, I would be grateful. I would feel gratitude that I have the anxiety response because it's so valuable.
Well, I'm sticking with this same example of the snake situation here. You and I have lived in Florida for a very long time, so we
Right.
are familiar with the wildlife that we
Mhm.
typically encounter around here. If I was in Australia,
Oh,
if I saw a snake, there is no way I'm going to go near that snake because I don't know. I know that there's a lot of dangerous snakes in Australia, but if I was in Australia or Africa or any other country and I saw a snake, I would not approach it because
right.
I don't know. I'm not familiar. There's not my cognitive system is going to say, you don't know that snake. You don't know what kind of snake that is, and it could be dangerous. So, but that's where our anxiety is helping us. because it's there to keep us safe. So in her 6 steps, her first step is to understand exactly what we're talking about, to understand that anxiety is trying to keep us safe.
Right.
And I
Right.
think it's so important. I do talk to patients about that a lot, that, it's just communicating something to us. It's just letting us know that this could be a dangerous situation. Let's weigh what's happening and make sure that, but appreciate that the anxiety is just there to keep us safe.
Right. You get this feeling, and what it's saying to you is right now, you're not safe. And this restless agitation that we feel when we feel anxious is simply your body doing exactly what it's supposed to do, and that's gearing up for action. Okay. And so the first step is understand that anxiety is trying to keep us safe. It's not an enemy, it's an ally. It's telling us something that we need to pay attention to.
Right.
What we do about it is going to be a little bit different. But first of all, listen to it and know that your brain is telling you something that you ought to pay attention to.
So,
Now, with that, and people often ask this question, they say, well, wait a minute. There are times when I feel anxious for no reason. There's no snake, there's no fear, there isn't a lightning storm. So there's no apparent reason, but I get these feelings of anxiety. Yes, that happens. And what I would say here to keep it as simple as possible, there's a famous book that most people have heard of, even if they haven't read it. It's called The Body Keeps the Score,
right.
by Bessel van der Kolk. And he says, you might ignore all this stuff, but your body knows that something has somewhere in your body. You keep this, he calls it trauma. You keep these memories. They're somewhere in your system.
Right.
And a few years ago, a child psychiatrist in Houston, name is Bruce Perry, wrote a book, and he said, this is true even for infants.
Right.
And he's written a book called What Happened to You? And it's the same idea, is that something happened to you that you may not remember. It may not be part of your conscious memory, but your body retains that memory somewhere.
Yeah, in that book, What Happened to You, they tell a great story of a kid who had lots of emotional and behavioral problems at school, and he had been removed from his biological parents, and he was with a very stable, good adoptive family, and had been doing well. And then all of a sudden, he's in this classroom with this teacher who he had originally gotten along with really well. And all of a sudden, this kid starts having all these behavioral and emotional problems and everything again. Like, what in the world is happening? It took some time, and they pulled all these things apart and everything. And they figured out that the teacher had changed his cologne to a cologne that was actually the same cologne that his father, the boy's father, wore. And
Right.
so every time the boy smelled the cologne from the teacher, it was triggering this neurological, biological response of fear and anxiety that was elevating his stress and his anxious response. And so once they figured that out, the teacher switched his cologne back, and suddenly the behaviors went away. And
Right.
so you're absolutely right. There's so many things. You have to remember that there's so many things that our body receives, stimuli that our body receives, that we don't necessarily process. That doesn't necessarily get to the cortex of our brain. There's just millions of bits of information that our body is collecting every second,
Right.
but only fractions of it actually get to our perception.
That's right, perception and conscious memory. But somewhere this stuff resides.
Right.
It is somewhere in our body or brain or something. We're not sure which. But so when anxiety hits, whether it's in the face of a real danger, like a live animal, or if it's just some shudder that goes through your body and you suddenly feel anxious for no reason, when anxiety hits, be curious.
Right.
First is, why do I feel unsafe? Where's this coming from? When anxiety hits, be grateful. The worst thing you can do is to muffle it. The
Right.
worst thing you can do is try to put the fire out. No, that's exactly the wrong thing to do. Figure out what's going on. Figure out why you're feeling unsafe. Either get to safety or
Right.
so the challenge is either get to safety or reassure your brain that everything is okay.
Right.
Do one or the other, but don't ignore it. The worst thing you can do is ignore it. Okay.
Yeah. Now,
That's
step
the first
two.
step.
Yep. Step one is recognizing that anxiety is there to help you. Step two is to plan a response. And again, I love this idea of because we try to help our patients do this so often, is plan your response. Know ahead of time, okay, so when I go into this situation, I know that my stress and anxiety level is going to elevate. So I'm
Right.
going to plan a response. This is what I'm going to try at
Mhm.
least to do in these situations. So when you start having these feelings with, your heart starting to beat fast, you're starting to shake, you're breathing fast, you're maybe getting sweaty, that's your body telling you that, okay, this is one of those situations. Have a plan before you go into those situations or before you reach those situations so that you can, have some steps that you're going to follow when you start to feel that way.
Right. So you have to figure out what you're going to do. Um, there are times in our lives where we have to face very, very difficult anxiety producing events. If you're divorcing, you have to sit across the table from your ex-spouse, and those are very difficult meetings. Or you're being reprimanded at work. Okay. When you know you're going to be facing a difficult situation, plan your response. How are you going to deal with it? How are you going to manage it? Don't just leave it open and say, well, I'll react. No, don't leave yourself exposed. Plan your response ahead of time, especially when you know something is going to be difficult.
Right.
And so that's one thing. When you know you're going into a difficult situation, or you know you're facing a dangerous animal or a dangerous weather condition. The second thing is when it just creeps up on you. Daniel Siegel is another neuroscientist who talks about these things eloquently and in very simple terms. He says, "Name it to tame it,"
Mhm.
and he also has a six-step process for calming your brain when there is no obvious danger. That's a unique set of so there's two circumstances. There's one is you're faced with an obvious danger, a sight or a sound. The other is there's no apparent reason. What can I do? And Siegel has this six-step process, which is mentioned in this article that's in the show notes. So this is how you deal with a a danger that you don't perceive. You just get this very anxious feeling, comes out of nowhere. And he said, this is a way to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, step three is to, fancy this, collaborate, work with your body. And again, it's a great way to think about this idea of preparing for the
Yeah, right.
situation.
Mhm.
When you, if you're an anxious prone person, or if you know that you're going into a situation that could produce some anxiety, as the ones that you mentioned, you're preparing ahead of time and working with your body to make sure that you're set. So that could include some of the things that we've talked about so many times,
Yeah,
making sure that you're
yeah.
getting enough sleep, making sure that you're eating well, exercising, a lot of these things. And we'll kind of explain why this helps in particular with anxiety, but it's these same healthy lifestyle things that we can do that's going to help us work with our bodies in these situations.
Yeah, one of the things I like about Suzuki's approach and Spring's approach is they're saying, look, anxiety is a lot more complicated than just it's a mental illness that you have to get rid of. And so they take this much more comprehensive approach. And I think they're absolutely correct in doing it this way. We are all prone to anxiety. Some of us are more anxious than others, but we all have this emotion. We're supposed to have it. And so our obligation is to prepare our bodies for this. If you're an athlete or a soldier, soldiers and athletes prepare their bodies. That's where you go to boot camp or you go to spring training. You do all that before you face competition or before you face combat. And so because we have this emotion, that we call anxiety, and because it can be so damaging
Mhm.
and difficult to deal with, these people who take this more reasonable, comprehensive approach tell us you have to take care of your body. And so there's several things that they talk about here, and I think this is really useful information, not just for anxiety, but for life in general.
Right.
Sleep, for example. We talked about the amygdala earlier and said the amygdala fires this electrical discharge and sends us into fight or flight. As it turns out, the amygdala becomes more alert and more reactive if you sleep fewer than 6 hours a night.
Yeah.
So if you're a short sleeper, then what you're doing is you're making your amygdala even more sensitive.
Right.
Okay. And then of course um, we know that if you sleep less, you're going to be more anxious. If you're more anxious, you sleep less. And so you have this terrible circular argument, this vicious cycle of so sleep is absolutely essential, and getting enough sleep is absolutely essential to protect your amygdala so that it does what it's supposed to do.
Right. And it's fascinating when we move to our diet, when you think about
Wow.
diets that are high in or they're high in ultra processed foods, right?
Mhm.
Foods that are ultra processed, boxed foods and foods that are, just ultra processed.
Frozen pizza is an ultra processed food. I discovered the other day. I thought, oh, frozen pizza, what
I'm
could
not
be
going
wrong?
to pay attention to that one but you know,
Why
but
not?
80% of young people's energy comes from ultra processed foods.
That's
And it's really unbelievable to think about that. But as we look at the significant increase in anxiety that we've talked about so many times over the past few years,
Mhm.
past decade or so, um, you know, again, we say that these anxieties and everything have been increasing since the introduction of smartphones and things like that. Well, it's also been elevated and increasing since the significant introduction of ultra processed foods and the fact that again the vast majority of kids diets are made up of these processed foods.
That's right. You can't trick your body. That's what when Bessel van der Kolk talks about the body keeps the score.
Yeah.
If you're eating ultra processed foods increase anxiety.
Right.
And when you're anxious, you tend to eat ultra processed foods. So we have another one of those vicious cycles like sleep. Okay. So you have to tend to your diet. You can't dump this stuff into your body and expect everything to work out okay.
Right.
So we know that sleep is a problem. We know that diet is a problem.
Right. The environment. We have to think about our environment. And again, I just mentioned the article or the book that we've talked about the last few weeks as far as the anxious generation. Um,
Mhm.
we evolved in nature, but our body hasn't caught up with our technological advances, our
Right.
hyper-connected social media world.
Right.
And because of that, we're flooded with so much information, so much more information than our body is really prepared to handle just from an evolutionary perspective. And so, when we talk about having some time where you unplug for a little while and you just sort of disconnect from some of that bombardment of information, this is one of those reasons why, because it's so overstimulating that it can lead to and will lead to an elevated or increased risk for anxiety.
Right. And now there are two other things we want to mention quickly before we get back to that issue of avoidance. One is movement. Um, we live, we all live with the pent-up energy of anxiety that pools in our body. It's there all the time. Okay. We were meant to move throughout the day.
Hmm.
That's just what we did. You had to move to get food. You had to move to be safe. You had to move, but it's movement that's outdoors and in sunlight.
Right.
Okay, not in air-conditioned gyms. Now, moving in air-conditioned gyms are fine, but when you do a repetitive activity, even if it's running is you're doing the same movement over and over again. The way our joints are built is they're meant to do a range of movements, not a single repetitive movement. So we were meant to move in a certain way in daylight, in sunlight,
Hmm.
during the day, not in air-conditioned gyms, not in spin classes. Now, that's better than not moving at all, but
Right.
it's not the kind of movement that we need. So get outside and get moving the way we're supposed to.
Especially since we wonder why everybody has a vitamin D deficiency. It's because we don't go outside anymore.
We don't go in the sunlight, it's too hot. Substances, very simply, alcohol and caffeine both stimulate the fight or flight response. They both increase your anxiety. You might think that alcohol is calming you down. It might in the short term,
Right.
but alcohol activates the part of the nervous system that puts you into fight or flight. All right. So in the long run, alcohol isn't helping you. Same with caffeine. We use
Right.
caffeine to stay active because we don't sleep enough, but caffeine does the same thing. It stimulates fight or flight.
Yeah.
So we know that our bodies have evolved to move and respond in a certain way, and we have to obey that if we want to avoid these problems.
Right.
The last thing that she talks about in this third step is avoidance.
Mm-hmm.
You don't avoid anxiety. The natural response to anxiety is to avoid it, to get rid of it. Okay. Remember that anxiety is a message.
Right.
And if we avoid it, if we say, I'm anxious, I want to get rid of it because it's dangerous. It's telling you there's something in your environment, there's something in your body, you need to pay attention to it. Don't avoid it. Train your brain to confront these low-level anxieties before they become big ones. You cannot simply shove this stuff down and use a bunch of strategies to get rid of anxiety. You have to listen to it, you have to obey it, be grateful that you have anxiety because it's your brain way of saying something's wrong, let's take care of it.
Absolutely. Well, that is the end of today's podcast. That's the end of part one. We're going to talk a little bit more about all of this in our next podcast that will come out in a few days. And so we're going to expand this a little bit more in the next podcast. So,
right. Yeah, she has 6. We did the first 3, and the next podcast we'll do 4, 5, and 6.
yes.
So yeah, we'll finish this up.
All right. That's it for today. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.